Good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. Joining me in the studio today is Mr. Jason Bostic, Vice President, West Virginia Coal Association. If you recall, last month had Bill Rainey, the President of the Coal Association, here in the studio, and we were just talking about the current status of the industry today, talking about some of the job levels, some of the tax contributions. And we ran out of time before we were able to finish, and Bill's not able to be here today, but Jason Bostic, again, who's Vice President with the West Virginia Coal Association, is taking time from his schedule to join us. Jason, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks for having me.
A lot going on in the coal industry, has been a lot going on over the past few years, a lot of ups, a lot of downs. I know we've gone through a period of time where we've lost a lot of coal jobs and a lot of mining operations have been shuttered. We've lost a few in-state coal-fired utility plants. So there's been mainly a lot of negativity over the forecast of coal and the status of coal. Thought maybe we just talk today about some of the trends that we see today, that we're experiencing today, and maybe some of the, if we could just take a glimpse forward to maybe to the extent we can be predictive over what the future holds.
Okay.
So why don't we start with just kind of a quick summary of where you see things.
Okay. As you know, today the West Virginia coal industry in particular, and the thermal coal production that's used to make electricity, continues to suffer from the effects of EPA's mercury regulation. And even though the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated that regulation and sent it back to EPA for recalculation and rework, the majority of the power producers in this country made decisions relative to their power plants based on eventually that regulation becoming finally effective. So it caused the closure of about 72 gigawatts of coal-fired generation around the country, a loss of about 110 million tons of coal consumption. And unfortunately, because of the way the electric power market and those power plants were fueled, the majority of that 100 million tons of production was lost in West Virginia. Southern West Virginia in particular, because it produced low sulfur, high BTU coal that was supplied to the plants that were closed simply because the cost to upgrade them with new pollution controls was too high. So we've seen a real downturn in the thermal electricity market coal produced from Southern West Virginia. And that's been primarily the impact that you've seen that's had the reduction in production and jobs in West Virginia. But we think that process is starting to work through. Most of the plants that were scheduled for closure have closed. So that the remaining plants will continue to burn coal. The amount to which they burn West Virginia coal is largely dependent now not on their sulfur content or on their BTU content, but more based on the price of the fuel. So these large coal-fired power plants, the fact that they were upgraded to comply with EPA's new regulations, can burn coal from any region, which includes much higher sulfur coal from the Illinois Basin or even lower quality coal from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming.
So there's really, if I could just stop you there, so there's really no advantage today or no measurable gain if a coal has a lower sulfur content.
That's exactly right.
Like we experienced, just a drawback in history 25 years ago now, or somewhere around then, when the acid rain amendments to the Clean Air Act were enacted by Congress. Utilities, if I recall, basically had two options. Mm-hmm. They could put the really expensive scrubbers on, or they could go to a lower sulfur coal product.
Yes, sir.
And when that occurred, you had a mixture of those options being implemented, but for the most part, Southern West Virginia and its low sulfur deposits really became carried a premium on that commodity.
Absolutely, and those provisions also gave birth to the Powder River Basin in Wyoming. Coal that, like the low sulfur coal in Southern West Virginia, the world always knew it was there. There just was no demand for it until the Clean Air Act kicked in. or the original provisions, sulfur dioxide provisions kicked in. So suddenly there was a demand for this coal that we always knew was there. But as the power plants have upgraded to remain in operation, again, expecting EPA's mercury rule to be found eventually to be legal and to be upheld, the power companies have closed the plants, 72 gigawatts across the country. And we lost 6 plants and 18 individual units in West Virginia, as an example.
Wow.
And
You know, I'm not sure everyone really internalizes what you just said. And it's not just been here, but you know, around the country, primarily in the eastern states. We've lost, as a direct result of Mercury MAC and perhaps seeing the Clean Power Plan, you know, around the corner, upwards of 400 plants.
yes.
I
And
think I
that's-
read that somewhere where there's actually been 400 coal-fired units that have been closed as a result of those two initiatives.
To really put it in perspective, Chris, I looked at some updated statistics this morning, and you've lost enough generating capacity to power 44 million homes. And to even put it in even greater perspective, that's essentially every household west of the Mississippi River, excluding the state of Texas. You have lost that much electric generating capacity because of this one rule. But again, to keep going back to the point about EPA and the fact that that agency has shown a tendency in the current administration to ignore its mandate to follow the law, that regulation was ruled illegal. The U.S. Supreme Court has sent that back to be redone and reworked, but the damage has already been done. You know, you've lost that many power plants across the country. You've lost 6 here in West Virginia, and we, as the West Virginia coal industry, have shed almost about 100 million tons of production.
Wow. That's, when you think about that, and with that amount of production, so we have gone from, as a state, from producing 165 million tons of coal. And I recall seeing that number as sort of an average over a 10-year period, 10 years ago, you know, from the previous 10 years, which would have been, you know, from the new millennium up through, 2008, 2010. So since that time, we've gone from 165 million tons of coal to a baseline of somewhere around, we're below 100 million today.
We are. So I think we're on track to produce 75 to 80 million tons this year, which is a dramatic reduction, as you know, in our history. And what you've seen, Chris, is a shift in the production in West Virginia. Thermal coal for electrical production is shifting back to northern Appalachia, northern West Virginia, higher sulfur mines in the Pittsburgh seam. And southern West Virginia is kind of going back to its roots that it relied on before the sulfur dioxide provisions, where we will mine high quality metallurgical coal for steel making in southern West Virginia. A little bit of thermal coal, but not nearly as much as what we're used to.
You know, one of the things that I think prevented us from even declining more and showing greater losses here over the past 3 or 4 years has been the strength of the Chinese economy. And not only were we shipping, you know, high-grade metallurgical coal to China for their steel making capacity, but we were also sending steam coal over for the first time.
We were.
And, you know, we consequently, the exports of U.S. Coal climbed considerably. And I believe West Virginia's export product nearly doubled over 2010 perhaps to 2014, 15.
Yeah, and you know, as you know, the international market for metallurgical coal began to not cool, but extra production in Australia, which is obviously closer to the Chinese market. And Australian metallurgical coal is much easier, much cheaper to produce than Appalachian coal. Mines in Australia came back online. They had some weather issues, some transportation issues. Those were straightened out. So Australia began to ship metallurgical coal back into the Chinese market, which kind of evened out the demand. And on the thermal coal side, you had things going on in Europe that created this immense demand for high BTU, low sulfur coal. The sulfur content still matters a great deal to our international thermal customers. And you had displacement of nuclear generation in Germany and other European areas, which created a great demand for our coal to be shipped
Well,
into that market.
you had the nuclear disaster, or with the fleet with the tsunami in Japan, 3-4 years ago now, and they lost a great percentage. I forget the exact percentage, but they lost a great deal of their capacity to generate power. So it's my understanding they have, changed all those plants that were affected by the water and tsunami to coal-fired units today.
And Germany, and speaking of Europe, Germany went through a kind of a hybrid clean power plan-like experience with its renewable generation. And I think Germany learned the hard way that relying on renewables to produce base load economic electricity day in, day out is unworkable. And unfortunately, they didn't plan far enough ahead, so they were left scrambling to find coal supplies for what were previously shuttered coal plants. And that, again, that's stabilized now. Germany's power grid's back under control. But having said all that, as the general global economy improves and the demand for electricity and steel improves, we're seeing the benefit of that somewhat in West Virginia. Primarily not yet to the point of increased production so much as increased pricing, because so many, as you know, so many of the mines in West Virginia have closed, particularly southern West Virginia, and the infrastructure's deteriorated to the point where they cannot be turned back on like a switch. It's going to take some time. So the lack of supply has led to an uptick in pricing.
Well, I think that's that's surfacing. No pun intended, but that's surfacing not only in your met prices, but it's aiding the steam prices as well.
It is, and Chris, in terms of steam coal production, if West Virginia does have a silver bullet, and as the coal consumption market readjusts itself and redesigns itself, even though we have lost the low sulfur advantage for southern West Virginia coal, West Virginia coal itself, whether it's northern West Virginia or central Appalachia and southern West Virginia, is still the highest quality coal in the world. If you have to move a ton of coal X number of miles to make electricity out of it, you might as well move West Virginia coal because you get much more heat per ton or per pound of product. So if we can, as a state and as an industry, this is going to take some help from our policymakers, I'm convinced of that. If we can get our cost under control, our regulatory cost, our taxes, and with respect to the federal government, ease some of the burden of the Clean Water Act and EPA overreach, then I think West Virginia coal will begin to retake some of the market share that it's lost domestically to the Illinois Basin or even to the Powder River Basin.
Let's stop there for a few moments and just maybe elaborate on that point. This industry has virtually run on automatic pilot for a large number of years. Government intervention has typically been to regulate the industry or add to the regulation of the industry to a real or perceived problem, that the policymakers believe exist. The time has come, given how much the effects of public policy has on coal mining. The time has truly come for our government here in West Virginia, goes without saying in Washington, D.C., given the regulatory battle that we've been confronted with, or the coal industry's been confronted with there. But, this industry needs help, is begging for help from its government, to help us in the marketing of the product, as you indicate, to help us become more efficient, to help us, cut on what I will clearly characterize as unnecessary or over-regulation.
Chris, unfortunately, West Virginia, your point about on autopilot with respect to the state policymakers, that's exactly accurate, because the industry was always perceived, and not just by policymakers or by lawmakers, but probably by many of us in the industry as well, that we're always going to be here. West Virginia coal is such high quality, low sulfur, and so the demand's always going to be here. But with mercury mact and the regulations closing these power plants, and with Australia and metallurgical competition, that's not exactly true. You know, I think it's safe to make the point that when you see displacements of coal-fired electrical generation for West Virginia coal supplies, we're not so much being supplanted or replaced by natural gas as we are being replaced by cheaper coal from other regions. The Illinois Basin in particular is shipping to power plants that were designed, built, and predicted to run on West Virginia coal supplies, particularly in the southern half of this country. And with mercury mact, we don't have that set place in the market anymore. So I think the policymakers looked at us as, you know, whatever tax increase, whatever extra fee, the coal industry will always be able to adjust to that. And that's just not the case anymore. And I think everybody needs to take a hard look at any regulatory burdens, tax burdens, things of that nature, where you can adjust the levels or the layers of bureaucracy that are dealt with in this industry. Again, not going to compromise environmental protection, miners' health safety, or even the financial standing of the state. But we do need some adjustment, because mining, even today, and even after losing 100 million tons of coal production, the coal industry is still the broad-shouldered atlas of the state of West Virginia. You know, we are responsible for the economic and social well-being of the majority of West Virginians.
No question about that. And when we talk about, you know, job losses and the loss of production, and particularly on the order of magnitude of half of the state's production, or 80 million tons, if you will, with that comes several hundred thousands of dollars or millions of dollars of tax revenues and contributions to the state. And we're seeing it firsthand. You know, not only do we have 11, 12,000 miners that have been furloughed, that are off work, and their families not having that spending power and weekly paycheck. You know, we're seeing a lot of government services. We're seeing the curtailment of county and municipal governments around the state. Positions lost, can't do what they were doing because they just don't have the funding or tax stream coming in because of the loss of mining jobs.
That's exactly right. Because then, as you know, the multiplier effect of a mining job, because mining is so capital intensive, you know, for every one coal miner, depending on the location of the mine or the location of the related business to a mine, you have the multiplier effect of anywhere from 3 other jobs in the economy as to as high as 11. Railroaders, truckers, things of that nature.
Two statistics jumped out at me when you were just saying that. You know, West Virginia right now, because primarily the loss of coal jobs and in the indirect jobs created by active mining, we have the highest unemployment rate in the country.
Yes.
And we have the lowest workforce participation rate. You know, less than 1 out of every 2 adults that are physically able to work are working in West Virginia.
That's exactly right.
And that's unacceptable.
It is, and I just returned from a trip to the southern part of the state here recently. And Chris, I think unless policymakers, federal and the state level, but let's face it, I think, you know, from in terms of West Virginia, we have to affect what we can within the state borders. Unless we take a hard look at making this industry more competitive. Again, best quality fuel, best quality coal in the world. We just have to
Best
get our
miners in the world.
best miners, but the most skilled, admired all around the world. When other countries and other world leaders want to know how to mine coal, they come to the state of West Virginia. But unless we can get our cost under control, then entire communities in this state are at risk of literally disappearing. And it's already starting to happen.
We've had good help from our government here on the state level. The legislature in particular, over the past couple of years, it seems like the first time in a long time, you know, they recognize that they can influence the growth or further decline of this industry. I mean, they realize while a lot of the issues are coming out of Washington, D.C. that has such an adverse impact on West Virginia coal, they also recognize that, you know, there might be some things that they can do on the state level to improve productivity, to remove regulation. And it
Absolutely.
seems like they've really been focused towards that objective under the leadership of Senate President Cole and House Speaker Armstead. I know they've taken it personally and have accepted the responsibility of trying to mitigate losses and improve the status of the industry.
They absolutely have, Chris. In the last two legislative sessions, I've never seen folks as committed to helping us work through this difficult period in the legislature that we have right now under those two well-tuned leaders. And I think they have tasked us, the coal industry and the association, this is just the start. What else do we have to do to get this under control? With the hope, I think, that when sanity or more balance returns to Washington, that West Virginia's positioned, our industry's positioned to take advantage of whatever market opportunity is created when illegal or burdensome regulations are removed or finally struck down.
You know, you always hear of new businesses that do fairly well here domestically. They want to branch out into the international market. When you talk about the coal industry, you know, one of the things that jumps out at me is that it's always played in an international market. You know, for the life of coal here in West Virginia or within the United States, we've always exported the product around the world. So we're not only concerned, or the industry is not only concerned with you know, domestic issues, but everything from the weather, undesirable climatic events in other countries, to even social or government unrest in some of these other foreign countries can potentially have an influence or a backlash to West Virginia's coal industry.
Absolutely, Chris. And that's particularly true with the metallurgical coal market used to make steel and iron and steel and other refined steel products. It is so economically finicky, if you will, that the currency differentials between the yen and the U.S. dollar and the euro affect whether or not West Virginia coal is fed into a steel furnace in Belgium, or whether it's Russian coal or even Australian coal. That market but it's always historically been volatile. Maybe not as much as it is today, just because of overall the world's production of raw materials to meet a raw demand for steel and consumer products is down. But almost with every year, it becomes more susceptible to variations, what would otherwise be minor variations in the economic world market.
Think of some of the few things that we've mentioned here, and just during our discussion, we talked about, you know, the tsunami in Japan caused Japan to go from trying to rebuild or reconfigure its fleet of nuclear plants to coal. You mentioned Australia, one of our bigger competitors. Well, they had a major catastrophic level flooding and precipitation events 3-4 years ago. And it just literally you know, wiped out some of their loading and transportation ports and infrastructure as well. So they lost mining operations.
They did.
And we were the benefactor of that, you know, because they were required to slow down their production or halt their production. We were able to increase ours. And right here in West Virginia, we showed major gains in the met market.
Yes.
Because of the catastrophic flooding in Australia.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting to watch, Chris, and still is. You know, something as what would seem to be as remote and removed from our day-to-day business as a problem with a lock and a dam on the Mississippi River can impact primarily international shipments of coal and have ripple effects back throughout the economy. But even smaller than that, maybe a railroad congestion point, say to one of the export terminals in Norfolk or in Newport News, can have a backloading effect on our ability to ship coal and ultimately impacts the market.
What do you see, you know, one of the things I heard here, I'm going to ask you just to comment on it, but you know, when you're downsizing, as we've been experiencing in the period we've been going through here, where you're laying off people and closing mining operation, I mean, it's just a horrible, horrible situation, especially for those miners and their families. But do you see things leveling off or plateauing here anytime soon? I know we're going through a period now where there seems to be some bright spots here or there, but what do the, you know, the projectionists say about going forward?
I think, Chris, we are starting finally to see things stabilize just a little bit. The met market is helping because metallurgical coal production is primarily southern West Virginia.